My name is Rachel Palmer, and I'm 37 years old. Just last week, I found myself standing in the gleaming foyer of a grand hotel, attending a professional gala, the kind with crisp linen tablecloths and a string quartet playing quietly in the background. It was supposed to be my night, a culmination of years spent grinding away in research and education, late nights bent over data and lesson plans, sacrifices that, at long last, were being recognized. I'd counted down the days, imagined the moment 100 times, the applause, the feeling that everything I'd endured had been worth it. But that night had a twist waiting for me, a twist I never could have anticipated. I slipped away from the bustling crowd to the restroom, craving a moment of quiet to steady my nerves. There, in the soft light by the mirrors, stood my mother. I hadn't laid eyes on her in nearly 15 years. She looked exactly as I remembered, immaculately put together, hair perfectly styled, lipstick applied with the same precision she brought to every aspect of her life. For a heartbeat, I wondered if she'd even know who I was. Then her gaze caught mine in the mirror, and all at once, time seemed to freeze. Her hand, lipstick poised just above her lips, stilled. Her jaw tightened, the only sign of the shock I knew she felt. "Rachel," she said, her tone so even, so utterly controlled. It could have been any ordinary day. There was no tremor in her voice, no hint of the years lost between us. It was the kind of greeting you'd offer a passing acquaintance at a country club, not your estranged daughter, reunited by chance after half a lifetime apart. "I didn't expect to see you here." I gripped my clutch a little tighter, holding onto it like a lifeline. "I could say the same," I answered, forcing myself to keep my voice steady, my face neutral. "What brings you here?" She turned to face me, her posture as rigid as always, every muscle tense but regal. "Your father and I were invited," she said, matter of fact. "We've always supported organizations that promote education. It's important to give back, don't you think? And you?" "I'm being honored tonight," I replied, meeting her gaze head-on. "For my research." For a fleeting moment, something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe even pride. But she quickly smothered it, burying any real emotion beneath layers of practiced composure. "I see," she said coolly, turning back to the mirror and dabbing her lips. "Well, I suppose everyone finds their way eventually." Her words hit me like a slap, pulling me back through the years to the day I finally left home for good at 19. The memories of those early years felt as vivid as ever, etched into my bones. High school had been a battleground for me, my mind a storm of anxiety and depression I was powerless to contain. But in our family, emotions were inconvenient, flaws to be hidden away. When I tried once to explain the heaviness I felt, she dismissed me with the same impatience she now reserved for a smudged lipstick. "What could you possibly be sad about?" she demanded, her voice sharp and incredulous. "You have everything. Stop making excuses." But I wasn't making excuses. I was drowning, struggling to stay afloat under the weight of expectations. The relentless drive to be perfect, to embody everything the Palmer name was supposed to represent. My grades slipped in junior year, and by senior year I was barely holding it together. My parents didn't see a child in pain. They saw a disappointment, a flaw in the carefully constructed image of our family. The day my community college acceptance letter arrived, my father's fury was volcanic. "This family has standards," he barked, pacing the living room while I sat clutching the letter in my trembling hands. "You've done nothing but drag us down. If you want to waste your life, that's your choice. But don't expect us to support it." His words were a final, irrevocable judgment. My mother sat silently, scrolling her phone as if I weren't even there, as if I'd already vanished. That night I packed a duffel bag. Just the essentials, really, though it felt like I was packing away my entire life. As I walked out the door, neither of them looked up. My mother remained on the couch, absorbed in her screen, and my father disappeared into his study, his verdict delivered. Stepping into the night, I felt an ache so deep it was almost physical, a sense of loss mingled with a strange sort of freedom. For the first time, the air outside felt like my own, even though it was laced with fear. For weeks, I surfed couches, lugging my bag from one friend's apartment to another, feeling every bit as unmoored as I was. Community college was my only tether, a place that had nothing to do with my parents, a fresh start that belonged solely to me. I picked up a part-time job at a greasy diner, slinging coffee and pancakes to scrape together enough for tuition and rent. Eventually, I managed to rent a tiny studio apartment, a single room with peeling paint and a leaky faucet. But to me, it was proof that I could survive on my own terms. Those early days were rough. I juggled classes during the day, night shifts at the diner, and a gnawing sense that I was already a failure. That feeling clung to me, a constant reminder of everything I'd left behind. But even as I struggled, there was a new kind of relief in being free from their relentless judgment. No one cared about the Palmer name here. No one expected perfection. I dove into chemistry, partly because I'd always been curious about it, partly because it was hard and I wanted to prove I could master it. My high school record was nothing special, so I started behind most of my classmates. But for the first time, I was learning for me, not for anyone else. I spent long nights poring over textbooks, scribbling formulas on scraps of paper, determined to catch up. I'll never forget my first chemistry exam. I'd poured weeks into studying, memorizing every equation and reaction, terrified that I'd still fall short. When the professor handed my paper back, I hesitated before looking, convinced I'd see disappointment staring back at me. But there it was, 92%. Not perfect, but good. Good enough to make my chest ache with pride. For the first time in years, I felt hope flicker inside me, a sense that maybe, just maybe, I could build myself into someone different. Over time, I changed. Community college wasn't glamorous, but it became the crucible where I learned to fight for myself. I juggled coursework and shifts at the diner, paid my own bills, and figured out what it meant to rely on no one but myself. Every small victory, a passed exam, a positive comment from a professor, a rent check paid on time, was a building block, a step toward reclaiming my life. By the time I finished my associate's degree, I was no longer just a student. I was someone who had survived, someone who had learned to carve out her own place in the world, independent of anyone's approval. I transferred to a 4-year university, and the challenges didn't stop. There were still moments when doubt crept in, when the old voices echoed in my mind, telling me I'd never be enough. But I kept going. I threw myself into research, finding solace in the quiet logic of the lab, the thrill of discovery. I volunteered as a tutor, helping other students who were struggling, remembering what it felt like to need a lifeline. I built a new community, a patchwork family of friends and mentors who saw me, really saw me, and valued what I could do. Looking back, I realized that every step forward was an act of defiance, a choice to define myself by my own standards. The pain of those early years never fully disappeared, but it changed. It became fuel, a reminder of what I'd overcome and what I was capable of achieving. And so, standing in that hotel bathroom, staring into the eyes of the woman who had once dismissed my pain, I felt a strange sense of closure. I wasn't the scared, broken teenager she remembered. I was someone who had fought her way back from the edge, someone whose work was being honored in front of hundreds of peers. My mother's presence no longer had the power to unravel me. If anything, it made me stand a little taller. The rest of the night passed in a blur of speeches and handshakes, but when I stepped onto the stage to accept my award, I looked out into the crowd and saw her. For the first time, I didn't care whether she was proud or disappointed. This moment belonged to me. Not to the Palmer name, not to my parents' expectations, but to the woman I had become, forged in the fires of hardship and resilience. I held my head high, knowing I had finally found my own way. I learned how to push through all of it. The relentless self-doubt, the voices in my head echoing every criticism I'd ever heard, the weight of feeling like I'd always be the odd one out. The shy, insecure girl who barely scraped by in high school, she slowly faded away, almost without me noticing. Bit by bit, I became someone who could stand at the front of a classroom, look a crowd in the eye, and explain concepts that used to tie my stomach in knots. Chemistry, once the monster lurking behind every test and assignment, became my anchor. It was more than just a subject to survive. It became my language, my proof to myself that I could be more than what people expected. I didn't want to just pass. I wanted to excel, to dominate, to rewrite the narrative that had always painted me as the disappointment, the one destined to fail. While juggling my part-time job, I started interning at local research labs, eager for a taste of the real work scientists did. That's where the world cracked open for me. Suddenly, I wasn't just a student. I was part of a team, running experiments, collecting data, learning the kind of things no textbook could ever really teach. My supervisors saw potential in me, and that encouragement set off a chain reaction. Before long, I was leading projects at a nonprofit dedicated to making science accessible to underserved kids. It was the kind of place I wished I'd had as a kid, a place where curiosity was celebrated, not stifled, and where being different wasn't a flaw, but an asset. Every day I saw glimpses of my younger self in the kids I mentored, and I tried to show them they could carve out their own spaces, no matter who doubted them. Graduating with my bachelor's degree was supposed to be a victory lap. The moment I finally felt seen, I pictured my parents, maybe not cheering, but at least acknowledging what I'd accomplished. But when the day arrived, there was nothing. No call, no text, not even a half-hearted message. My dad, with his sprawling fertilizer business and endless connections, and my mom, queen of their glitzy social scene, were silent. Their wealth bought them everything except warmth, except any real investment in me. They only seemed to notice me when there was something to criticize. A grade too low, a hobby they didn't approve of, a way I didn't fit their mold. It didn't matter that I'd finished with honors, that I'd poured everything into making it. In their eyes, I was still the blemish on their carefully crafted image, the child who deviated from the script. I tried to shrug it off, to tell myself their approval didn't matter. But deep down, it stung in a way nothing else did. I guess I'd always hoped for some sign that I wasn't invisible to them. But that hope faded a little more that day. The only family who bothered to show up was Aunt Lydia, my mother's younger sister. She was always the black sheep, the one my parents whispered about. Too wild, too opinionated, too much. But she saw me. She always remembered my birthday, sent postcards from her travels, called just to check in. At my graduation, I spotted her in the crowd, waving with such enthusiasm that I couldn't help but smile. After the ceremony, she found me in the parking lot, arms full of sunflowers and daisies, beaming like I just won the Nobel Prize. "You did it, kid," she said, pulling me into a fierce hug. "I'm so proud of you. No one else gets to decide what you're worth." It was just her and me, standing in that crowded lot. But it felt like the whole world had opened up. Her support reminded me that family isn't about blood or appearances. It's about the people who show up, who love you even when you're messy and uncertain and a little bit lost. Aunt Lydia never cared about the path my parents set out. She cared that I found my own way, that I fought for it even when it felt like no one was in my corner. A few months after graduation, I was knee-deep in a research project at the university, hunched over data sets and glassware, when Dr. Collins stopped by my lab bench. He was one of those professors you never forget. Strict but fair, demanding but passionate, always able to make the most complicated ideas sound like poetry. He'd noticed my persistence, the way I wouldn't back down from a challenge. "Rachel," he said, voice low and serious, "I've been talking to some colleagues at Oxford. There's an opening in their environmental chemistry department, and I think you'd be a perfect fit." At first, I laughed the idea off. Me at Oxford? It sounded ridiculous, like something out of someone else's story. But Dr. Collins was insistent. He told me this wasn't just another job or internship. It was a chance to contribute to research that could actually make a difference in the world. "Don't let your fears get in the way," he said, looking me straight in the eye. "You've earned this opportunity." So I applied, even though every step felt impossible. The application process was grueling. Essays, interviews, reference letters, more paperwork than I thought possible. I barely let myself hope. But then, after weeks of anxious waiting, it happened. An email popped up with the subject line, "Congratulations on your research grant." I read the words over and over, not daring to believe it was real. Oxford wanted me. Someone believed I could do something important. I kept it quiet. I didn't reach out to my parents or the people from my old life. I didn't want their disapproval or their attempts to talk me out of it. Only Aunt Lydia knew. I called her a few days before I left, and she was over the moon. "You've worked harder than anyone I know," she told me. "Don't let anyone or anything hold you back now. Let yourself soar." She understood why I needed to leave, why I had to step out of the shadows I'd lived in for so long. She promised to keep my secret, to let me start over on my own terms. So I packed up everything I truly needed, just a backpack and a sturdy sense of hope, and boarded a flight to England. I landed in Oxford feeling both terrified and exhilarated, like I was stepping into a story I'd only dreamed of. The first few weeks were rough. The gray drizzle, the clipped accents, the unfamiliar streets that twisted and turned in ways that made me feel lost and small. Loneliness crept in at night, and I missed the comfort of the familiar, even if it had never really felt like home. But every day, as I threw myself into my research, I started to find pieces of myself I didn't know existed. I was working on projects that mattered, studying chemicals that could help clean our air and water, collaborating with researchers from all over the world. For the first time, my work felt like it had weight, like I was part of something much bigger than myself. Slowly, I built a new life. I found friends among the other researchers, people who shared my passion for science, people who didn't care about where I came from or what I'd left behind. I learned to navigate the city, to appreciate the quiet beauty of its ancient buildings and the gentle rhythm of life there. I started to believe little by little that I belonged. Oxford became more than just a place. It became proof that I could choose my future, that I could matter on my own terms. Every day I grew more confident, more certain that I wasn't defined by my past or by the people who never saw me. I was finally becoming the person I'd always hoped I could be, a person who fought for what mattered, who made a difference, who belonged. Chemistry was never meant to shape my destiny. For years, it was simply a subject, another hurdle on the academic path, a field I studied because it seemed practical, a way to tick the boxes my parents hoped I'd fill. They wanted so much for me to succeed, to carry the family name forward with pride. And I clung to the hope that excelling in science would finally bridge the gap between their expectations and my reality. But somewhere along the line, maybe in the quiet hours hunched over textbooks, or in the hush of a lab after midnight, something unexpected happened. Chemistry became more than just a way to earn their approval. It started to feel like discovery itself, a lens through which I could glimpse the future, not only for myself, but for the world. Pursuing my master's, I found myself swept up in the thrill of research, the pure, electric joy of asking questions that no one had answered yet, the satisfaction of pushing through setbacks and finding patterns in chaos. That hunger for understanding propelled me forward, and before I knew it, I was packing my life into suitcases for a PhD at Oxford. Those years were some of the hardest and most defining of my life. Days bled into nights. Experiments failed more often than they succeeded, and the weight of expectation, my own and everyone else's, felt crushing at times. There were moments I thought about giving up, moments when the isolation seemed unbearable and the magnitude of my ambitions nearly broke me. But always, some stubborn ember of hope kept me going. I told myself that every setback was a lesson, every failure a stepping stone. When I finally earned my PhD, exhaustion mingled with triumph. Suddenly, I was no longer invisible. People in environmental chemistry began to recognize my work. Invitations trickled in to present at conferences, to contribute to journals, to collaborate with brilliant minds. For the first time, it felt like I had a place in the world I'd worked so hard to enter. And then, out of nowhere, an email arrived that changed my life. An offer to teach at Cambridge. It was the kind of opportunity I had never dared to imagine for myself, the sort of dream that feels so improbable you never speak it aloud, even to yourself. I knew I had worked for it, earned it, but the reality of such recognition seemed almost surreal, as if it belonged to another person entirely. Accepting that offer was both exhilarating and terrifying. I was stepping into a legacy far bigger than myself, entering halls walked by generations of thinkers and innovators. At Cambridge, I discovered something new, the joy of teaching. I didn't expect to love it, but standing in front of a classroom full of curious, ambitious students, I found a sense of purpose I hadn't anticipated. Guiding others along their own journeys, passing on the passion and knowledge I'd fought so hard to gain, became deeply meaningful. I saw myself reflected in the eyes of students who felt like outsiders, who doubted their place in the world of science. I remembered my own days at community college, feeling invisible at the edges of every room, certain I would never belong. And yet, here I was, leading research teams, shaping minds, and somehow becoming someone others looked up to. Despite everything I had achieved, a part of me still looked back over my shoulder, hoping for acknowledgement from my family. Every time my phone buzzed, I half expected to see my parents' names, to hear their voices asking about my life, my work, my happiness. But the calls never came. The mailbox stayed empty. I wondered if they ever wondered about me, if they understood what I had become, what I had overcome. The memory of my mother, standing before her mirror, fixing her lipstick with practiced precision, haunted me. I could still hear her voice, soft but resolute. Everyone finds their way eventually. Those words settled over me like a heavy quilt, comforting and suffocating all at once. Did she truly believe them, or was it just something to say before turning away? I thought about the years I spent chasing their validation, about the sting of rejection from community college, the cold silence after I left home, and the way they seemed to erase me from their lives without a second thought. Even after crossing an ocean, earning degrees and making a name for myself, the ache of that distance lingered. It all crystallized at a gala, years later. I'd returned to the city for an awards ceremony, and somehow, my mother was there, floating through the crowd, poised and untouchable. We crossed paths in the bathroom. She glanced at me, offered a cool nod, as if my journey, every late night, every sacrifice, every accomplishment, was nothing more than a footnote. In that moment, I realized something essential. I had spent so much of my life trying to reach her, to earn her pride, but I had outgrown the need for her approval. I was standing in a world she would never touch, had become someone her old judgments could no longer define. She returned to the party, drifting back into the world she'd always known, while I lingered behind, staring at my reflection, letting go of the last threads that bound me to her expectations. I understood, finally, that their silence no longer had power over me. I had built a life on my own terms. I had become a mentor, a researcher, a leader, and, most importantly, someone I could respect. The evening pressed on. The gala's chatter grew louder, glasses chimed, and laughter echoed through the hall. I tried to push the encounter from my mind, focusing instead on the moment I had earned. When my name was announced, the lights ignited the stage, and applause erupted, louder than I had ever imagined. Rachel Palmer, honored for her groundbreaking contributions to education and sustainable chemistry. It felt distant, as if I were watching someone else ascend those steps. I tried to project calm confidence, but inside, my heart thudded with the weight of everything I had sacrificed to stand in that spotlight. The crowd saw only my achievements, the polished surface of my story. They didn't know the depths of doubt, loneliness, or resilience that had brought me here. They didn't see the quiet resolve it took to keep moving forward when every door seemed closed, or the strength it took to find belonging in a world that sometimes felt determined to keep me out. But I knew. For the first time, I let myself feel proud. Not for anyone else, not even for the institution that honored me, but for myself. Then, as the applause faded, the host's voice rang out, cutting through the room. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have an exciting announcement. In recognition of tonight's honoree, a generous anonymous donor has pledged a $2 million grant to support her ongoing research and impact in education. For a moment, the room fell utterly silent. All eyes found me, and I felt the enormity of what was unfolding in real time. This wasn't just an award or a fleeting accolade. It was a promise, a testament to the work I had done and the work still ahead. Standing there, I realized that my journey was only beginning. I had crossed continents, shattered expectations, and built a life in the pursuit of knowledge and purpose. I had transformed from the girl who never quite fit into a woman leading the way for others, carving space for herself and for those who would come after. My story wasn't just about chemistry. It was about resilience, about forging an identity in the face of indifference, about finding validation within myself when the world refused to offer it. As I looked out into the sea of faces, I understood with absolute clarity. I was no longer defined by anyone else's dreams or disappointments. I had become the person I needed to be, not for my parents, not for anyone else, but for myself, and for the future I now had the power to shape. I blinked, utterly stunned, my mind struggling to catch up. $2 million. The number floated in the air, shimmering and impossible, like something conjured from a dream. For a split second, I let myself imagine the announcement was meant for me, that I was the one whose life would be transformed in an instant. But the host hadn't said a name yet, and the words hung over us all, heavy with anticipation. I felt suspended, caught between disbelief and hope, trying to process how such a sum, enough to shift the course of a life, a career, maybe even the entire field, could be out there for the taking. This grant, though anonymous, will go to the person tonight who's shown exceptional dedication to advancing chemistry and education, the host's voice continued. Steady and practiced, but it thundered in my ears. $2 million. I couldn't quite make sense of it. The sheer magnitude, the ripple effect it could have. It was more than just money. It was possibility, validation, proof that someone believed in the kind of work I did and the future it could build. But there was another feeling, a shadow in the back of my mind. The donor didn't know who would receive this grant. They had no idea it would be me, didn't realize they were about to change the life of the very person they had once cast aside. As the crowd murmured in excitement, I let my eyes wander, scanning the faces gathered beneath the sparkling lights. Everyone seemed caught up in the moment, their energy humming with curiosity and envy. But then, near the back, just by the exit, I saw motion, a ripple that broke through the crowd's anticipation. My father. He stood abruptly, almost violently, his chair scraping against the floor. His face was twisted with something raw, a mixture of anger and disgust, and his eyes locked onto mine for a single electric moment. The recognition in his gaze was unmistakable. He knew, or at least suspected, that everything he'd tried to suppress in me was about to be rewarded. Then, as if the air itself had become poisonous, he turned on his heel and strode for the door, moving with a speed and purpose that spoke of desperation. I watched him go, every step driving a spike of disbelief and pain deeper into my chest. This was the man who'd turned his back on me, who'd thrown me out of his house and his life for daring to be different, for refusing to live up to his impossible expectations. Now, just as my work was being recognized on the grandest scale, he couldn't even bear to stay in the room. He didn't wait to hear who the grant was for. He didn't want to see me succeed. The emotions surged. Anger, disbelief, and something darker, more ancient. A grief I thought I'd buried. This was supposed to be my moment, the culmination of years of struggle, a vindication of every lonely night and sleepless hour in the lab. But even now he refused to witness it. He couldn't bring himself to see his daughter stand in the light. As he disappeared through the doors, a strange heaviness pressed down on me. Something about his abrupt exit felt wrong, unfinished, as if he was fleeing not just me, but something in himself. I tried to steady my breathing, to force my mind back to the present. But the announcer's voice broke through, sharper than before. Ladies and gentlemen, we're incredibly fortunate tonight. Not only do we have a generous donor for this award, but also a longtime supporter of education and sustainable chemistry. The $2 million grant comes from Mosaic Fertilizers, a company led by one of the most influential figures in the industry. The words hit me like a slap. Mosaic Fertilizers, my father's company. In that instant, the whole tangled web of irony and pain snapped into focus. The money, the opportunity, the recognition. It all came from him, the man who had rejected my ambitions, dismissed my dreams as childish, and shamed me for not following his chosen path. He was the source of the generosity, the architect of this moment, and yet he had no idea that the person he was honoring was the very one he had tried so hard to erase from his life. I stood frozen, my mind spinning in 1,000 directions. How was it possible that the same man who had made me feel so small, so unworthy, was now enabling the greatest success of my life? The irony was almost unbearable, a cosmic joke played at my expense. He had built his company on values of progress and responsibility, but couldn't extend a fraction of that open-mindedness to his own daughter. Now, through some twist of fate, he was unknowingly giving me the platform to prove him wrong. The room erupted in applause, but the sound felt distant, muffled, as if I were submerged underwater. My vision blurred at the edges, the weight of the moment threatening to crush me. I was supposed to feel triumphant, but all I felt was hollow, as if the applause were for someone else, someone more deserving. I gripped the microphone, my hands trembling, and forced myself to speak. "Thank you," I managed, my voice quivering. The words sounded empty, barely adequate to contain the storm raging inside me. But I couldn't think of anything else to say. I needed to escape, to breathe air that wasn't heavy with expectation and bitterness. I turned and hurried off the stage, refusing to look back at the sea of faces or the forced smiles of my colleagues. Each step away from the spotlight felt like shedding a layer of skin, exposing nerves I thought I'd dulled long ago. My heart pounded as I pushed through the doors and into the hallway, driven by a single overwhelming thought. My father. I had seen the look on his face. Anger, yes, but also something else. A flicker of vulnerability or regret that unsettled me. I couldn't let it end like this, with him fleeing the very moment that was supposed to heal old wounds. I needed answers, or at least closure. I burst through the doors to the outside, gulping in the cool night air. My eyes swept the parking lot, searching. There, by his car, shoulders tense, back rigid. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the darkness that ringed the lot. I didn't think. I just ran. "Dad!" I called, my voice cracking with all the urgency and pain I'd kept bottled for years. He didn't turn at first, his posture defiant, as if bracing himself against a world that perpetually disappointed him. When he finally turned, to face me, I saw the same old bitterness etched into his features, the familiar hard set of his jaw, but there was something else, too. A shadow of uncertainty, a question he was afraid to voice. For a moment, we simply stared at each other, the silence thick with everything we'd never said. I realized that this was more than just a confrontation over a grant or a career. It was the reckoning of a lifetime. A chance, perhaps, to finally be seen by the man who had so long refused to look. "What is it now, Rachel?" he snapped, his voice sharper and more frigid than I'd ever heard before. The chill in his tone seemed to cut through the air between us. "You think I'm going to congratulate you?" I froze a few feet away, feeling the weight of his glare. My heart was hammering in my chest, so loud it drowned out the sounds of mingling voices behind me. There was no mistaking what this was about. He hadn't known who the grant would go to, not until they stood on stage and called my name. Up until that point, this was just another formality for him, another act of corporate benevolence. Write the check, pose for the press, let Mosaic Fertilizers play philanthropist for the night. He'd had no idea I would be the one accepting the check, standing under the lights with people clapping and cameras flashing. Now, his mask had slipped. He stood there, arms folded, his lips twisting into a sneer that was equal parts bitterness and disbelief. I don't know if I should be disgusted or impressed. Here you are, taking my money. That's what you always wanted, right? The resentment in his eyes was like a physical force, impossible to ignore. Sure, the grant was $2 million, and yes, the funds had come from his company. But once he handed the check to the foundation, the decision was out of his hands. The foundation's board, not him, had chosen me. I saw the irony written on his face, the realization that he'd unwittingly become the benefactor of his own estranged daughter. I felt a strange satisfaction at that, but also a wave of sadness. It was just another twist in the complicated knot that was our relationship. "I didn't ask for this," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady even as my hands trembled. "I never wanted your money. I never wanted your approval. I earned this on my own, just like everything else I've accomplished." His eyes hardened, growing darker with every word. He shook his head slowly, as if disappointed but not surprised. "Doesn't change anything," he said coldly. "You're still the failure I threw out all those years ago. No grant, no award, no applause is going to fix that." For a moment, anger surged through me, hot and sharp, but I swallowed it down. I realized there was no point in fighting for something he'd never give me. "It doesn't matter what you think," I replied, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I've built a life for myself. If the money came from you, it doesn't mean anything to me." I turned and walked away, every step feeling both heavy and freeing. My heart pounded, but I knew I was done arguing, done seeking a validation that had always been out of reach. He'd never see me for who I was, only for who he'd decided I was years ago. I'd spent so long chasing his approval, believing that if I just achieved enough, succeeded enough, I could rewrite the past. But now, faced with his bitterness, I saw how hollow that pursuit had been. That night, sleep was impossible. I lay, awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the scene over and over in my mind. The $2 million grant felt like a strange, twisted trophy, a victory that left a sour taste in my mouth. Was this what I'd worked so hard for? To stand triumphant only to realize I'd won a prize tainted by old wounds? At first, I told myself this was payback, that I'd finally proven him wrong. But as the hours ticked by, the feeling faded. I saw the truth. No amount of money or applause could ever erase the years of rejection, the pain of being cast out and branded a failure by my own father. As dawn crept in, I made a decision that felt more right than anything I'd done in years. I donated the entire grant, every last cent. I wanted nothing to do with his money or the history it carried. Instead, I set up a scholarship fund, aimed at students who had been told they weren't good enough, who had been overlooked or underestimated, just as I once was. I wanted them to have a chance at building something of their own, unburdened by someone else's expectations or judgment. It wasn't just about moving the money from one account to another. It was about transformation. That grant, which had started as a symbol of his power and influence, became something new, an opportunity for others to rise, to be seen for their potential rather than their failures. In giving it away, I finally broke the last thread, tying me to his approval and his contempt. As I pressed the donation button, a quiet satisfaction settled over me. For the first time, I understood that I didn't need his recognition, his forgiveness, or even his acknowledgement. I'd built something real, something lasting. My legacy wouldn't be defined by his grudges or the scars of our past, but by the lives I could help change. The bitterness that had once fueled me dissolved, replaced by a deeper sense of peace. I didn't need to win him over. I'd already won, by letting go, by giving back, by choosing a future that was mine alone.